In the waning light of the Achaemenid Empire, when the peacocks still cried over marble courtyards and the incense of myrrh drifted through silk-veiled halls, there lived a king whose name has been erased by trembling hands. The scrolls speak of Darius and Xerxes and the blood of Cyrus the Great. But there's one they do not mention, not in the temples, not in the tombs. It is said he did not flinch at the coronation, even as the priest sliced open a white bowl and smeared its blood across his brow. His voice, when he spoke, was like a blade dragged slowly across silk. The court feared him. The people worshipped him. And Artaxerxes began to build his own empire, of land or soldiers, but of secrets. He took her hand with the solemnity of a priest and called her jewel of my house, bone of my bone. The girl, half smiling, curtsied and practiced obedience. She did not know that the hand which held hers had strangled traitors, or that the eyes that watched her had never blinked at suffering. His name was Artaxerxes, and his reign was both glorious and grotesque, embroidered with silk and soaked in sin. He dissolved the traditional marriages of the court, banished his half-brothers to far provinces, and summoned his mother's bloodline to the palace. Musicians were summoned to play lullabies, not for a child, but for a queen. When the high priest refused to bless their union, he was found the next morning with his eyes plucked out and his tongue sewn into his hand. A new priest was appointed, one who understood that gods change when kings demand it. Barely 13, with hair like burnt honey and eyes wide with confusion, she stepped into the palace wrapped in linen, her bare feet leaving no sound on the onyx floor. And though the throne room still echoed with music, the silence beneath it grew louder. He placed a ring of emerald on her finger, and she, trembling slightly, placed a garland of blue myrtle around his neck. The people watched, silent and stunned, their cheers caught in their throats like bones. The scribes called it the union of sons. The elders called it blasphemy. She was his daughter, though no one dared say it. Born of a concubine who died in childbirth, raised in a quiet villa near Persepolis. She had lived unaware of who she truly was. She did not resist when he kissed her in front of the altar. She did not flinch when the priests declared her queen of the blood. And when she retired that night into the royal bedchamber, she whispered only one sentence to her handmaiden. "I feel like I've died, but he smiles, so I must live," till the summons came. No one understood why, until years later when the golden girl appeared. He was born under a crimson eclipse, or so the palace midwives whispered. His mother died screaming on a bed of gold thread, and his father King Halmastus spoke not a word at the sight of the infant. Some said the boy's first breath smelled of camphor and ash, an omen too dark to be spoken aloud. Yet he grew tall and solemn, his eyes too calm for a child. Tutors taught him rhetoric, conquest, and cruelty. Priests taught him to read omens and bird guts and dreams. He listened to both but loved neither, preferred silence, the kind found only in tombs and mirrors. When Halmasta was assassinated by wine and poison its source never traced, Artaxerxes ascended the throne at 17. Among his first decrees was one that made the priests blanch and the nobles murmur behind veils. Her name was Vana. Artaxerxes received her not as a father, but as a sovereign before a supplicant. The whispers began immediately. At night, candles flickered behind locked doors. Vana's chamber was moved next to his. 3 months later, Artaxerxes and Vana stood beneath a canopy of lion skins and roses, as the drums of marriage thundered across the capital. But none dared speak aloud the word that filled every chamber like smoke: incest. And in the center of it all stood Vana, her eyes no longer wide but glassy, like a mirror turned inward. Beneath the marble, something ancient stirred. Something the empire had buried long ago beneath layers of gold and shame. This was not love. This was legacy, etched in bone. They said the palace had no windows, only curtains, thick velvet ones, like blood clotted in folds, drawn across the soul of the empire. Within those curtains, the truth rotted slowly, like meat left too long in silver bowls. And Vana, now crowned empress, sat among the fragrance of orchids in decay. Her days were filled with silence. The court had been trimmed, like a dead tree polished for display. No more visiting nobles, no more sisters-in-law, cousins, or courtiers. She never wrote in full sentences, only fragments. Only the inner circle remained servants whose tongues had been burned flat. Eunuchs with blindfolded eyes, scribes who wrote in invisible ink. Artaxerxes called it purity. authors called it something else. Isolation, containment. A throne built not of power, but of fear. And in the center of this velvet prison was Vana, 17 and pale as marble. She walked like a dream, silent, obedient, always in white. But her eyes were not empty. They were watchers, listeners. Behind the delicate tilt of her chin was a mind unfolding in silence, like a paper knife drawn slow across forbidden scrolls. But that night, she took a shard of bronze from a broken mirror and carved the child's name into her thigh. Rivers dried too early in the season. Flocks of birds circled the temples but would not land. The priests, those who had not yet vanished, began, muttering of bloodlines cursed by hubris. The scribes were forced to revise the genealogies and official records. Vana was no longer Artaxerxes' daughter, but a noble from the house of Ashur. Again and again, father to daughter, mother to son. No new branches, only nods. That he laughed softly, rhythmically whenever someone in the palace died, her mother erased, her childhood rewritten. Without marks, without noise, a guard here, a midwife there. The royal gardener was found beneath the olive tree, hands full of worms, eyes wide with something no one could describe. Some said he had seen the boy watching from the upper window, smiling, not out of rage, not out of grief, but to remember who he truly was. She kept a diary. No one knew it existed, hidden beneath the base of a bronze incense burner, its pages inked with crushed berries and stolen wax. He had grown gaunt, almost translucent. He no longer walked, he glided, once thick and black, now hung in thin white strands across his back. But his voice had not aged. Oh, it still sliced, like it always had. Spirals eyes, trees growing upside down. He holds my hand until I forget which fingers are mine. I heard a child crying in the garden. But we have no children here. There is a door behind the throne. It bleeds in my dreams. This. If I give him a son, will the boy marry me too? She did bear a child at 19. A boy, they called him Sarum, which in the old tongue means the loop of the chain. He was beautiful, too beautiful. Skin like ivory, dusted in ash, and eyes a perfect match to both his mother and grandfather. Nurses said he never cried. Midwives said he never blinked. Vana held him like a statue, stiff and silent. When Artaxerxes kissed her forehead in congratulations, she did not speak. A son, a grandson, a curse. Meanwhile, the empire began to whisper again. Crops failed in 3 provinces. But stories like ghosts do not obey paper. And in the alleys of Persepolis, the people called the royal child by another name, the son of the spiral, because the bloodline had begun to fold in on itself. Some say Saram grew with strange traits. He spoke in full sentences before he turned 1. He could recite hymns no one had taught him. And people did die. Quietly in court, Artaxerxes seemed undisturbed. He issued new decrees. All noble women of childbearing age must now marry within the royal line. Any child born with deformities was to be returned to the sun, a euphemism never explained, and the palace was to be sealed, permanently. No one in, no one out. What was he afraid of? Or more terrifying still, what was he nurturing? Vana, now mother and queen, did not weep. But at night, she began carving strange symbols into the stone walls of her chamber. She had come to understand something she could not say aloud. That blood, when folded too many times into itself, does not only rot the body, it warps the soul, it births something else. And she began to wonder if her son would one day take her hand, as her father once did, not because he loved her, but because that was the law of the spiral. By the 22nd year of Artaxerxes' reign, no one spoke his name aloud. In the dusty outer provinces of the empire, where the sun still touched the soil, and children still laughed, the capital had become a forbidden word. Merchants no longer traveled there. Maps left its borders blank. Messengers sent to ward the palace never returned door came back hollow-eyed, muttering in a language no one recognized. The empire, it seemed, had a heart, but the heart no longer beat. And in the palace of silence the spiral tightened. Sarum was 7, or perhaps 8. Time had grown slippery in the marbled halls. He never aged like other children. His skin remained pale and unblemished. his pupils dilated too wide. He asked no questions, but answered them with uncanny precision, often before they were spoken. Servants refused to touch him directly. Vana had stopped speaking entirely, communicating only in nods and half-closed eyes. Some said the boy had merely been speaking to him. Others said he had opened his mouth, and something else had spoken through it. He replaced the temple idols with mirrors. He decreed that all prayers be addressed not to Ahura Mazda, but to the blood that remembers. When asked what that meant, he replied, "My son knows. Ask him." The boy had a favorite room, a cold, circular chamber beneath the palace, lined with obsidian slabs. It had once been a royal bathhouse. 28 years for which no records, carvings, or official decrees remain. When Alexander the Great reached the city decades later, he found ruins palaces blackened by fire, statuary melted, bones encased in resin, but no names, no tombs, no royal bloodline. The spiral, some believed, had begun to consume its own body. Now it was dry, and the walls were carved with the names of ancestors long forgotten. A clay tablet buried beneath the ruins of the old palace bathhouse. It was cracked, smudged, and written in a strange blend of old Persian and something else, something older. Scholars dismissed it as nonsense, until one translated a single line scratched over and over like a chant. There, where Sarum would sit for hours, running his fingers along the inscriptions, whispering to them, listening. Vana, watching from her high window, said nothing. But in her diary that night, she wrote, "Sequences repeated in impossible patterns, defying known mutation rates." Some speculated it was the result of extreme inbreeding. Others warned that no genetic line should fold in on itself for so many generations without. And on its forehead, carved from within the bone, the faint spiral of a forgotten dynasty. Consequences. It was in this room that the high priest appointed by Artaxerxes himself was found dead, his tongue bitten off and eyes turned completely black. Whispers spoke of the return of the godseed. A prophecy found in a broken Zoroastrian tablet centuries older than the Achaemenids. It warned of a bloodline folded too many times inward until the vessel of flesh cracked. Something divine poured through. The palace healers were summoned. They examined the priest's corpse and then themselves disappeared. "I have seen a god wear my son's face, but it is not my son behind the eyes." The corridor, what remained of it, began to shift. Artaxerxes embraced the idea. He no longer referred to himself as Shahanshah, King of Kings, but as Inchimar Yasada, the body of the god without name. No one did. Instead, people began to disappear. Noble women, servants, entire generations of scribes, their quarters emptied in silence, and still no records survive. Historians speak of a gap, a curious lacuna in the scrolls of Persepolis, as if they had never existed. But one text remained. Blood loops. Flesh listens. The spiral becomes the mouth. Beneath it, one final sentence, faint, as if written by a trembling hand. "I tried to break it. Forgive me, Sarum." It was signed only with the letter V. In modern times, geneticists studying ancient Persian mummies found anomalies, fragments of DNA that did not match any known lineage. One researcher, unnamed in the published report, allegedly said, "It's as if the code was trying to write something else entirely, not human, not even mammal." The report was retracted, and yet the rumors remain that in a sealed wing of a museum in Tehran lies a skull child, sized and perfectly symmetrical. Its eye sockets too large, its molars fused. She waited until the winter solstice. In the old traditions, it was the night when the veil between the worlds grew thinnest, when the gods walked among men, or men were drawn into the places where gods should never be. The palace, once teeming with life, had grown impossibly still. No fires burned in the hearths, no sandals echoed across the marble. The walls dripped with condensation, though no rain had fallen in weeks. Not since the night she found the spiral carved into her own shoulder blade, an axe she did not remember. Her handmaidens had long vanished. She dressed herself now, ate little, dreamed less. But she remembered the old stories. Stories told in her mother's village, before the palace, before the blood, before the spiral. Vana stood in the upper chamber, staring at the boy as he slept. Saramir's son, her blood, her undoing, was curled beneath a blanket embroidered with her own childhood name. A god that could not be worshipped with offerings or flame, but only with lineage. A being that did not live in temples, but in names passed down again and again until the names folded in on themselves and became ... it. His breath was shallow, almost too still. At times she wondered if he breathed at all. His eyes never fully closed, and when they opened, they were always watching her, or something behind her. And once inside the family tree, it grows downward, not upward. She had not written in her diary for a year. There was one story in particular, about a creature made not of flesh, but of memory, but anointed with something older than poison-crushed bones of the unremembered, oil drawn from the tree that never bloomed. A blade not meant to kill a child, but to close a gate. It does not enter through the mouth, the story went. It comes through the womb. Vanna now understood. She had not birthed a son. She had opened a door. Visions flooded her. Burning ziggurats, bloodlines stretching into infinity, men marrying shadows of themselves, women bearing beasts. Nations ruled by the same soul reborn in the same flesh, again and again and again. On the solstice night, she carried Sarum down to the spiral chamber. The torches flickered blue, as if protesting her presence. The air was heavy, like breath trapped beneath water. In the center of the room, where the floor still bore the dried blood of the high priest, she laid him gently, whispering lullabies from a childhood that never truly belonged to her. The boy opened his eyes, but they were no longer his. There was something vast behind them, ancient. Watching mother, he said. As a child speaks, but as something ancient remembering how to use a voice. The mirrors cracked. The genealogies turned to ash, and every spiral carved into stone vanished, as if erased by a hand from beneath the earth. "You are not my son," she replied, voice calm. "I am your end, in your beginning. You are the spiral." In whispered lullabies sung in old dialects. In ruined temples, where the spiral still appears faintly beneath newer carvings. Inside, a shard of bone. It hums. It is warm to the touch. And etched faintly across its curve is one word, repeated again and again in a language no longer spoken. In the minds of those who dream of children with eyes to wise, and kings who marry their own daughters to trap gods in blood, he smiled. Not with his lips, but with his skin. And the walls of the chamber seemed to pulse with his breath. She held the dagger in her hand. "Bronze, dull, you must understand," she whispered, tears tracing clean paths through her dust-covered cheeks. "I loved you, before you opened your eyes." The thing that was Sarum blinked once, and then it screamed, not aloud, not in words, but in thought, in memory and agony so ancient it cracked the stones. She drove the blade into his chest. There was no blood, only silence, and then collapse. The chamber folded, the torches snuffed, and for a moment the palace breathed its last. Artaxerxes, wherever he was, fell to his knees and roared. When the sun rose, the palace was gone. In its place, a crater, perfectly round, blackened, empty. Epilogue. Nung hu bequen sai, they say, history forgets what it must. The name Artaxerxes appears in no lineage. Vanna is remembered only as a myth. Sarum was never born officially, but fragments remain, somewhere deep in the vaults beneath Tehran. If the rumors are truth, there lies a sealed jar. Remember, so when you trace your family tree, and the branches curl too tight, be careful where it leads. Sometimes blood carries more than memory. Sometimes it remembers too much. Until next time, keep your name sacred. Never follow the spiral.